Have you ever said yes to something you didn't really want to do, only to wonder later, why did I agree to that? Or maybe you walked away from a conversation realizing, wait a second, I just gave in, and I don't even know how they did it. You're not alone. This happens to all of us, more than we care to admit. But here's the truth. There are invisible threads constantly pulling at your behavior. Psychological principles so deeply embedded in our social fabric that we barely notice them, even when they're shaping our thoughts, decisions, and emotions. And these aren't just parlor tricks, they're ancient, strategic, sometimes even dangerous, used by marketers to sell, used by politicians to persuade, used by manipulators to control, and yes, sometimes used innocently by your best friend to convince you to stay out later than you wanted. Today we're going to unpack 15 psychological tactics, tools of influence, habit, and subtle persuasion. Some will seem harmless, others will feel unsettling, but all of them work, because they're rooted in how the human mind is wired. Let's set the stage. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This quote is the perfect entry point, because most of these psychological tricks don't just influence others, they expose you. Your mental shortcuts, your emotional blind spots, your vulnerability to suggestion. And that's the twist. To understand how these tricks work on others, you first have to recognize how easily they work on you. Now, why does this matter? Because influence is power. And as Machiavelli wrote in The Prince, the promise given was a necessity of the past. The word broken is a necessity of the present. He wasn't being cynical. He was being realistic. People respond not to what's right or fair, but to what works in the psychological moment. Machiavelli understood this centuries before social media, email marketing, or leadership coaching ever existed. That perception, timing, and mental framing control people far more than facts. These psychological tricks, they're not about being fake. They're about understanding how decisions are made, not in the logical prefrontal cortex, but in the emotional undercurrent, where fear, urgency, liking, authority, and scarcity play their games. Modern psychology agrees in thinking fast and slow. Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman describes two systems of the mind. System 1, fast, emotional, intuitive. System 2, slow, deliberate, logical. Most of these psychological tricks bypass System 2 altogether. They don't wait for you to think. They leap into the intuitive side of your brain, triggering gut responses, unconscious mirroring, and snap decisions. And this is why they're so powerful. Because by the time you realize what happened, you've already responded, you've nodded along, you've agreed, you've bought the thing, you've said yes, and now you're wondering, how did that happen? But this script isn't just about protecting yourself. It's also about mastery. If you're someone who wants to communicate better, influence ethically, build habits, understand human behavior, or simply stop being manipulated, then you need to understand how people are moved. And here's the secret. Most people don't want to manipulate others. They want to connect. They want to be understood. They want their ideas to matter. Understanding these tricks can help you negotiate better without being aggressive, lead without domination, present ideas without pushiness, and build trust without needing to overshare. But let's be honest, there's a dark side to all of this. Because the same trick that helps you inspire your team can also be used to control them. The same tactic that helps you sell your service can also be used to scam someone. So here's the rule we'll carry throughout this video. Use these tools consciously. Use them ethically. Never use them to dehumanize. Power without awareness leads to corruption, but power with integrity, that's how transformation happens. Jung also said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. Let's not avoid it, let's face it. Because when you do, you're no longer just reacting to life. You're responding to it with intention. So here's what's ahead. We'll explore 15 psychological principles that actually work, each one grounded in either cognitive psychology, behavioral science, evolutionary instinct, or social philosophy you'll hear about. Tricks used in politics, sales, and even classrooms, behavioral hacks backed by science and old ideas from people like Carl Jung, Machiavelli, Daniel Kahneman, James Clear, and others. Each point will include practical examples, underlying psychological reasoning, and ethical cautions. By the end of this video, you'll not only spot manipulation when it's used on you, you'll know how to wield influence with wisdom and protect your mind from those who don't. So take a breath. This isn't just about tricks. It's about becoming a more aware, empowered, and influential version of yourself. Because in a world that constantly tries to sway your attention, your actions, and even your identity, the ability to understand influence is the ability to stay free. Let's begin. Trick 1. Use their name strategically. What's the sweetest sound a person can hear? No, it's not music, not the laughter of children, not even the chime of a notification. It's their own name. Think about it. When someone says your name in a crowded room, your attention shifts like a magnet. You could be lost in thought, scrolling your phone, and still, the moment you hear your name, your focus snaps back. This isn't random. It's neurological. Your name is deeply wired into your brain's reticular activating system, the part that filters out noise and signals what's important. And for your brain, your identity is top priority. But here's the real trick. When you use someone else's name deliberately, in conversation, in persuasion, in conflict, you activate that same internal signal in them. You don't just speak to them. You speak through the noise to their core self. This is what Dale Carnegie emphasized in How to Win Friends and Influence People. A person's name is to that person the sweetest sound in any language, and neuroscience confirms it. In MRI studies, when people hear their own name, the areas in their brain associated with self-perception, emotion, and reward light up. Now combine that with what Carl Jung observed about identity. To Jung, names weren't just labels. They were symbolic containers of the self. He believed the ego attaches meaning to the name because the name holds the persona, the mask we wear, the identity we operate from in society. So when you say someone's name, you don't just grab attention. You subtly validate their ego's existence. You affirm, I see you. That's incredibly powerful. And when used ethically, it can transform connection and trust. But now let's shift to Machiavelli, who wasn't as gentle with human nature. He would have seen this tactic as a means to manipulate perception and loyalty. In a court filled with rivals, alliances, and betrayal, using names was a way to control the frame. Say someone's name often enough in public, and you imply closeness. Say their name during confrontation, and you signal power. Say it softly during negotiation, and you create a disarming rhythm. The name is not just a cue, it becomes a lead. So while Jung sees the name as a psychological mirror, Machiavelli sees it as a psychological handle. Here's how this plays out practically. In leadership, when a leader addresses their team by name, especially in praise, it builds loyalty. But when they avoid names in criticism, it creates distance. In sales or negotiation, using a client's name when reinforcing key points or pricing increases engagement and trust, as long as it doesn't feel forced. In relationships, saying someone's name during disagreement can de-escalate tension and keep the emotional focus anchored in connection. In manipulation, repeating someone's name excessively can be a power play, used to confuse, dominate, or even create artificial rapport. So like a sharp tool, it can carve trust or cut integrity. Let's pause. Should you always use this trick? Yes, but sparingly, strategically. Overuse makes you sound robotic or insincere. This is about mindful communication, not verbal gimmicks. Use someone's name when you want to signal safety or familiarity, you want to diffuse tension, you want to reinforce connection in a high-stakes moment, and especially when you're dealing with someone who feels unseen. Because in that moment, their name can be a lifeline. If you remembered nothing else from this trick, remember this. When you say someone's name with presence, you speak to more than just their ears. You speak to their selfhood, their pride, and their desire to be acknowledged. It's small, it's simple, but in a world full of noise and neglect, sometimes just hearing your name is enough to feel human again. Trick to anchor with touch or gesture mid-conversation. Imagine this. You're telling a story. You're mid-sentence, animated, focused, and someone casually hands you a coffee mug, or a pen, or even their bag. Without thinking, you take it. Why? Because you were already engaged. Your conscious mind was busy with the story, so your body defaulted to automatic compliance. This is what psychologists call anchoring through disruption. And it works by slipping a subtle physical cue or action into the cognitive blind spot created by mental engagement. It's sneaky, but it's also incredibly human. The brain loves focus. When you're immersed in conversation, your prefrontal cortex allocates all attention to maintaining flow, tracking thoughts, facial expressions, tone, sequencing. So when someone hands you something your brain reacts using a different system, motor habit and social compliance. This is similar to what Daniel Kahneman would call a System 1 response. Automatic, fast, and unconscious. You don't evaluate the object. You don't pause to ask, why am I taking this? You simply respond. This is why waiters, salespeople, and even con artists sometimes use this strategy. Because once you accept something physically, you're more likely to accept mentally what follows. In neurolinguistic programming, this idea is formalized into a technique called anchoring. Pair a physical gesture with a mental state to subtly program a future response. For example, a teacher might place a hand on your shoulder while praising your work, associating physical connection with success. A negotiator might gently hand over a contract right as they say, "This deal is fair for both of us." The gesture anchors cooperation. These aren't coincidences. They're embedded cues designed to bypass resistance and attach meaning to motion. Carl Jung would likely interpret this through the lens of autonomic behavior and unconscious patterning. To Jung, our actions are not entirely free. They're shaped by clusters of emotional experiences stored beneath awareness. When someone interrupts our flow with a subtle action, we often default to what Jung called the collective shadow response, an instinctual gesture of politeness, helpfulness, or social fluidity rooted in centuries of human interaction. In other words, we say yes with our hands before we realize we've agreed. This tactic would have delighted Machiavelli. Why? Because it creates compliance without confrontation. Instead of forcing someone to agree, you create a moment of small surrender, a physical yes that opens the door to a larger psychological agreement. Machiavelli would call this an act of preparation for persuasion. Not persuasion itself, but softening the battlefield before negotiation begins. Here's how this plays out in day-to-day life. The banana peel trick. You're talking with someone. Mid-sentence, you casually hand them a used banana peel. 9 out of 10 times they'll take it. Why? They're focused on talking, not evaluating. The delegate move at work. You're in a team meeting, discussing a shared project. You say, I think you'd be amazing at this part. Then you physically slide the folder over. They take it, almost on cue. Now the responsibility is in their hands, literally. Parenting tactic. A child is protesting cleaning up. You hand them the toy while casually asking about school. Mid-story, they begin tidying up. No argument, just a shift in flow. It works because it doesn't trigger resistance. It flows within the rhythm of connection. This isn't about tricking people into doing things they don't want to do. It's about understanding when people are most receptive and how to guide momentum without force. That said, if used, for example, to dump responsibility onto others or guilt someone into doing favors, it violates trust. So ask yourself, am I anchoring this gesture to empower or to escape accountability? Am I guiding someone toward clarity or away from their will? As with all psychological tools, intention is everything. In a world driven by distraction, most people miss the moment where their automatic mind takes over. But if you're aware, if you know how and when people are most open, you gain the ability to lead with subtlety rather than force. Anchoring with a gesture or object isn't just a trick. It's a reminder that humans are embodied minds. And sometimes, the hand agrees before the head can protest. Trick 3, the nudge and the nod. Subtle movement, powerful persuasion. You're explaining your point with enthusiasm, and without realizing it, you start gently nodding your head, and then the other person starts nodding too. And soon enough, they're agreeing with you. Sound familiar? This isn't just coincidence. It's contagious behavior, and it's one of the simplest yet most effective psychological tools of influence. The nudge and the nod. In the 1980s, a study published in the Journal of Applied Psychology revealed that headnodding done by a speaker during a persuasive argument increased the likelihood that the listener would agree. Because humans are wired for mirroring, we subconsciously imitate the behaviors of those we're emotionally attuned to. This is called nonverbal synchrony, and it plays a huge role in persuasion. When you nod while making a point, the other person's brain feels the movement before their logic kicks in. They begin to physically agree before they mentally commit. This ties directly into the science of mirror neurons, cells in our brain that fire not only when we perform an action, but also when we observe someone else doing it. So when you nod, you're not just moving your head. You're activating agreement circuitry in someone else's mind. It's like planting a seed that says, this feels right. You can trust this. It doesn't guarantee agreement, but it tilts the playing field in your favor. Now, how would Machiavelli view this? He'd smile and then nod right back. To him, this tactic would be a bloodless victory. Instead of arguing someone into submission, you invite them into harmony through rhythm. Machiavelli understood that the best way to win loyalty was not through direct force, but by appearing to reflect the desires of the people, then slowly guiding them toward your goals. Nodding while speaking is exactly that. You don't push them, you guide them, subconsciously. From a Jungian lens, this connects to the concept of the persona, the mask we wear in social settings. Jung believed that much of what we do in public life is not rational, but ritualistic, a dance of symbols, gestures, and roles. When you nod while speaking, you're sending a symbolic message. I am safe. I understand you. We are in alignment. This makes the listener as a persona relax, their defenses drop, and agreement becomes less about the idea itself and more about the emotional wrapper behind it. Let's make this tangible. In presentations, you're pitching a project. As you say, this is the best solution for all of us. You nod gently. Without even noticing, some team members begin to nod too. The agreement has started, not because your data is flawless, but because your delivery carries subconscious confidence in debates or arguments. Instead of raising your voice, you stay calm, measured, and nod occasionally as you speak. This communicates emotional steadiness, making your opponent feel you're not a threat, but someone they can yield to without shame. In everyday persuasion, you're telling your friend they really need to try a documentary. You're gonna love it, you say, nodding. The nod primes them to agree, even before they check the trailer. And it's not just about you. Sometimes, listening while nodding, especially in emotionally charged conversations, can encourage the speaker to open up further. It says, I'm with you, keep going, let's be clear. Nodding isn't some Jedi mind trick. If your content is garbage, nodding won't save it. But if your message has value, this physical cue can enhance delivery and connection. That said, the line between influence and manipulation matters. Are you nodding because you genuinely believe in what you're saying? Or are you using body language to slip past someone's resistance for your own gain? Because when persuasion becomes performance without integrity, it crosses into coercion. In an age where arguments are louder and division is sharper, the quiet power of the nod reminds us that you don't always have to push to lead. You can influence by modeling the very agreement you hope to receive. The nudge and the nod don't scream, they don't debate, they suggest. And sometimes, that's all it takes to tip the scales. Trick 4. The chameleon effect. Mirror without mimicking. You walk into a room of strangers. Some nod, some stay neutral, but one person, not loudly, not obviously, leans back when you lean back, smiles when you smile, tilts their head just slightly when you do. You don't even notice it. But when you leave that room, you'll probably say, I liked that one. I don't know why, but I just felt a connection. That's the chameleon effect in action. And it's one of the most powerful and most invisible psychological tools of influence. The term was coined by psychologists Tanya Chatrand and John Bargh in a 1999 study, where they found that people who subtly mimic another's posture, facial expressions, or speech patterns are often liked more by that person. It's subconscious, it's automatic, and it creates an instant feeling of familiarity and rapport. Why? Because human beings evolved to favor the tribe. We're drawn to those who act like us, sound like us, and move like us, because, biologically, that signals safety. When someone mirrors us, the brain doesn't just think they're friendly. It thinks they are one of us. This effect is deeply rooted in mirror neurons, the same system we explored earlier with nodding. When we observe someone performing an action, our brain partially activates, as if we were performing it ourselves. That's how babies learn. That's how empathy happens. And that's how social bonding begins, often before a single word is spoken. Machiavelli, if he were alive today, would weaponize the chameleon effect without hesitation. He'd see it as a way to blend into the court, mimic loyalties, and quietly align with whichever side held the most power. In The Prince, he warned rulers to appear virtuous when needed, but adapt quickly when virtue became inconvenient. It is not essential, then, that a prince should have all the good qualities, but it is most essential that he should seem to have them. Mirroring behavior is one way to seem agreeable without revealing your hand. To blend is to influence without resistance. In some contexts, it's survival. In others, it's strategy. Carl Jung would take a different route. He'd interpret the chameleon effect as a dance between empathy and projection. When you mirror someone, you're subconsciously saying, I see you, I reflect your energy, I want harmony. But Jung would also caution against losing yourself in the process. He warned of people who wear masks not to relate, but to manipulate, to blend so deeply that they no longer know where they end and the other begins. So here's the distinction. Healthy mirroring leads to connection. Manipulative mirroring leads to camouflage. Let's take this out of theory and into life. Making new friends. You're meeting someone for the first time. You notice they speak slowly and lean forward when listening. Without forcing it, you match their pace. You lean in slightly. The conversation flows better, not because of what you said, but how you moved with them. Negotiation or sales. A client uses formal language, sits upright, and gestures tightly. You reflect that tone. You don't crack jokes. You meet them where they are. They feel respected, and respect you in return. Diffusing conflict. Someone's angry, defensive. You remain calm but subtly reflect their hand gestures. You nod when they emphasize. The heat goes down, not through logic but mirrored regulation. This is the chameleon effect used wisely. To ease tension, build trust, and open doors that words alone cannot. Now let's get honest. There's a fine line between mirroring and mimicking, between blending for connection and imitating for control. If you mirror someone with no real intention of understanding them, just to gain advantage, they may not consciously notice, but their intuition will sense something's off. Because humans don't just read faces, they read energy. And if your gestures are insincere, they will smell the fraud. So here's the rule. Mirror to connect, not to control. Let the chameleon effect be a bridge, not a disguise. In a divided world, the ability to adapt, to lean in, to match energy, to say I see you without words, can make the difference between conflict and harmony. The chameleon effect isn't about trickery. At its best, it's about attunement. Because when two people move in sync, even subtly, the space between them disappears. And in that space, influence flows like water. Trick 5. Scarcity and urgency cues. Why now or never works in your brain. You see the ad. Only 3 left in stock. Your heart skips. You weren't even sure you wanted it. But suddenly, you feel like you need it. Or maybe someone tells you, this opportunity won't be available next week. And now, the choice that once felt optional feels urgent. This is the scarcity effect. one of the oldest and most powerful psychological levers in human behavior. And when combined with a dash of urgency, it bypasses your logic and taps directly into your survival circuitry. According to Robert Cialdini in his foundational book Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion, scarcity isn't about the product, it's about perceived value. Opportunities seem more valuable to us when their availability is limited. That's because the human brain evolved in conditions of scarcity: food, shelter, protection, attention. None of it was guaranteed, so we're biologically wired to respond to limited availability as a call to action. Your brain thinks, if it's rare, it must be important. If it's disappearing, I must act now. This triggers emotional urgency, often before the rational mind has time to intervene. Urgency is scarcity's twin. It adds time pressure to the fear of loss. A deal that ends in 5 minutes, a door that's closing. This isn't just sales hype, it's neuroscience. Time pressure engages your limbic system, specifically areas associated with risk, reward, and loss aversion. You shift from evaluation mode to reaction mode. It's no longer, do I want this? It becomes, will I miss out? And once you've entered that emotional state, you're easier to persuade. Now let's enter Machiavelli's mind. He famously said, "It is much more secure to be feared than to be loved." But he also understood the power of loss over gain. Create the illusion that something is slipping away. An alliance, an opportunity, a favor, and you create a loyal subject faster than with a gift. Machiavellian influence is rooted in two emotions: desire and fear. Scarcity uses both. Desire says, I want what I can't have. Fear says, I must act before I lose it forever. Combine them. You control the frame. Carl Jung would approach this from a different lens. To him, scarcity often activates the shadow, the unconscious part of the psyche that holds our repressed instincts. When we sense something is rare or slipping away, our unconscious may awaken deep drives: greed, envy, fear of insignificance. Suddenly, the product isn't just a product. The opportunity isn't just practical. It becomes symbolic of our worth. If I miss this, I'll fall behind. If I don't act now, someone else wins. If I say no, I'll regret it. These are not logical thoughts. They're emotional shadows posing as necessity. And that's what makes scarcity such a potent, yet dangerous, psychological trick. Let's bring this down to earth. In sales and e-commerce, you visit a site, a pop-up says, only 2 left at this price. You weren't planning to buy, but now your brain frames it as a now or never scenario. You click buy. In relationships, someone says, I can't wait forever. Suddenly, the dynamic shifts. You might not even want the relationship, but now, you don't want to be the one who loses it. In workplace negotiations, a job offer with a tight deadline, a manager who says, we have another candidate lined up. You feel rushed, anxious, and more likely to agree before fully evaluating. These are all scarcity cues, sometimes honest, often strategic. Scarcity can reflect truth. There really are limited seats. The sale does end at midnight, but it can also be manufactured to exploit urgency and bypass conscious choice. So the ethical question is, are you using scarcity to inform or to trap? Ask yourself, is the deadline real? Is the supply truly limited? Is the pressure justified or artificially inflated? Because the goal is not to force action. It's to clarify value and context. Scarcity is powerful not because people are foolish, but because people are human. We fear missing out. We respond to pressure. We crave what's slipping away. But once you understand how scarcity and urgency work on your mind, you regain your power to pause, to breathe, to ask, do I want this, or do I just fear losing it? Use this trick wisely, because when you create urgency with honesty, you invite decision. But when you weaponize it with deceit, you create regret. And no one trusts the person who makes them feel tricked into acting too fast. Trick 6: chew gum while you study. And again, during the test, you're sitting at your desk, surrounded by notes. You pop a piece of gum into your mouth, spim into your read, highlight, recite, chew. Then it's test day, same classroom, same nerves. You reach into your bag, unwrap the same gum, and chew. Somehow, the answers feel easier to recall, because you just used associative conditioning, a classic psychological trick with roots in one of the most famous experiments of all time. Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov wasn't trying to study learning. He was studying salivation in dogs. But one day, he noticed something strange. His dogs began to drool before the food arrived, just by hearing the footsteps of the lab assistant. So he designed an experiment. He rang a bell every time food was presented. Eventually, the dogs salivated just from the sound of the bell, even when no food appeared. This is classical conditioning, pairing a neutral stimulus with a meaningful one, until the neutral cue produces the same response. Now imagine this in your daily life. The gum is your neutral stimulus. The studying is the meaningful activity. The test is your real-life performance. If you always chew the same gum flavor while studying, you create a sensory association between the flavor and the information learned. Then, during the test, that same flavor acts like Pavlov's bell. It reactivates the neural pathway formed during learning. helping you recall the information more effectively. It's subtle, it's strange, but for many people, it works. This trick isn't limited to gum. It's part of a broader phenomenon known as state-dependent memory. Simply put, you remember things better when you in the same state or environment as when you learn them. This includes physical location, mood, posture, smells, sounds, tastes. In thinking, fast and slow, Daniel Kahneman explains that context and environment shape not just what we think, but how easily we think it. So chewing gum while studying, and again while testing, can cue your mind to retrieve ideas that would otherwise feel buried. Carl Jung might interpret this through the lens of symbolic anchoring. To Jung, even the smallest habit can carry unconscious meaning. Rituals, like lighting a candle, wearing a certain color, or chewing a specific gum, become psychological anchors that signal who we are in that moment. If the gum becomes part of your study ritual, then chewing it during the test tells your unconscious mind, I am focused, I am capable, I have done this before. It's not magic, it's identity, activated through repetition. Machiavelli likely wouldn't care much about minty fresh memory, but he would appreciate the strategy behind conditioning. He would say, if certain actions yield certain results, repeat them. Train others to respond predictably. Train yourself to perform under pressure. This is self-conditioning is power. If you want control, not just over others, but over your own performance, you must learn how to reproduce peak states on demand. This is where associative conditioning becomes a personal weapon. You control your cues, you control your outcomes. This trick isn't just for students. Try applying it to public speaking. Always rehearse with the same cologne or scent, then wear it on stage. The scent cues your brain to recall confidence in content. Exercise. Listen to a specific playlist when working out. Over time, those songs become mental triggers for energy and movement. Create a flow. Light the same candle every time you sit down to write or draw. Eventually, the scent becomes a shortcut into flow state. These aren't random habits. They're deliberate neural pathways. Habits that pull you into the identity you want to occupy. Conditioning can be powerful, but don't let it turn into a crutch. If you rely too much on the trigger, you may start to believe you can't perform without it. That's a psychological dependency, and it limits your flexibility. Use these tools as enhancers, not requirements. The power is in the association, not the object. Your brain is not a filing cabinet. It's a context machine. It remembers based on signals, flavors, sounds, environments that whisper, this is where you learned. This is who you were when you succeeded. So if you can control your cues, you can control your mind. And if a stick of gum can make the difference between blanking out and remembering clearly, why not use it? Trick 7. Use music as a memory trigger. Turn playlists into mental shortcuts. Think about a song that reminds you of a specific moment. Maybe it takes you back to a summer night, or a heartbreak, or a time when you felt powerful. It doesn't matter how much time has passed. As soon as the music starts, you're back there. That's because music doesn't just entertain. It anchors, it binds emotion to memory, creating neural bookmarks in your brain. And if you know how to use it on purpose, music can become one of the most effective psychological tools for focus, recall, and even emotional transformation. In neuroscience, this is called context-dependent encoding, the idea that we don't just remember what we learned, we remember where we were, what we felt, and what surrounded us. And music, it's one of the strongest contextual cues we have. Your brain processes music in multiple regions, including those linked to emotion, movement, and long-term memory. This is why Alzheimer's patients can often remember old songs even when they've forgotten names or faces. The music slips past the damage, because it lives in more than one place in the mind. So here's the trick. Choose a specific playlist or type of instrumental music. Listen to it only during a certain task. Studying, reading, writing, repeat consistently over time. Then, when you need to perform or recall that material, play the same music. It doesn't just set the mood. It primes your mind to re-enter the same neural state it was in during learning. You've essentially created a mental shortcut, a path your brain recognizes and runs down faster. Carl Jung believed that music was one of the few things that could bypass the ego and speak directly to the unconscious. To him, music wasn't just vibration or entertainment. It was archetypal language, expressing what words could not. When you bind music to learning, creativity, or healing, you're not just creating a memory aid. You're symbolically assigning meaning to the task itself. You're telling your unconscious, this sound belongs to this identity. So study music becomes more than a tool. It becomes a ritual of self. Machiavelli might have shrugged at classical conditioning, but he would have understood the strategic use of mood. He observed how rulers used ceremony, repetition, and aesthetic to shape how people felt, so they could shape how people behaved. In the same way, if you can control the atmosphere, you can control the mind inside it. In today's terms, your playlist is the palace. Let's bring this into real life. The study playlist. You listen to ambient piano or lo-fi every time you revise for an exam. Later, even just humming the melody can reactivate that focus state before the test. The writer's anthem. You're working on a book, screenplay, or business plan. You always open your laptop to the same track. Over time, your brain learns. This sound means it's time to create the mood transformer. You struggle with procrastination or low mood. You build a playlist that evokes power, movement, and action. And the moment you hit play, your energy shifts. In each case, the music isn't background noise. It's a mental switch. There's one caution. Music can be a trigger, but it shouldn't become a requirement. If you train your brain to only perform under the influence of certain songs, you risk becoming emotionally dependent on external stimulation. Use music to enhance your mental state, but still cultivate the ability to perform in silence. Not all music works the same way. For memory-based work, use instrumental, classical, or ambient. Avoid lyrics. For creative work, try cinematic scores, jazz, or emotional soundtracks. For physical action, go for upbeat, rhythmic tracks, high BPM to raise energy. The key is consistency. The more often you pair a playlist with a task, the more powerfully your brain responds to it. Music is the bridge between emotion and action, between the conscious task and the unconscious self trying to complete it. So the next time you need to study, focus, or perform, don't just sit down in silence. Ask yourself, what sound belongs to this version of me? Play it. Let it become the key that unlocks the state of mind you're trying to enter. Trick 8. Use cognitive dissonance to shift your identity. You say, I want to be financially responsible, but then you impulse buy a $200 jacket. You say, I'm someone who values health, but you haven't worked out in 2 weeks. That tension you feel, that discomfort between who you say you are and what you actually do, that's cognitive dissonance. And it can either destroy your confidence or become the key to transforming your life. Coined by psychologist Leon Festinger in 1957, cognitive dissonance is the mental stress or discomfort we feel when our actions, beliefs, or values contradict each other. Your brain doesn't like contradictions. It wants coherence. So when your behavior and identity don't match, it tries to resolve the conflict. That's where the trick lies. You can either justify the behavior and shrink your values, or would change your behavior to rise to your stated identity. The choice you make determines whether dissonance becomes an excuse or an engine. Let's say you tell yourself, I'm not a smoker anymore, but a few days later, you light one up. Now your brain is in conflict. Two self-images are clashing, the non-smoker and the current action of smoking. If the new identity is strong enough, it creates pressure. This doesn't feel right, I need to stop. But if the identity is weak or vague, your brain may ease the tension by rationalizing. It's just one. I've had a stressful week. I deserve this. This is where most people stay, cycling between intention and compromise. But there's another path. What if you used cognitive dissonance to intentionally change who you are? Here's the trick. Instead of waiting to feel like the person you want to become, start behaving like them first, even if it feels fake. Want to be someone who reads more? Start carrying a book everywhere, even if you don't open it at first. Want to be someone who saves money? Start telling yourself, I'm a person who values financial control. Then take a small action. Skip one coffee. Track one purchase. It creates intentional dissonance. At first it feels uncomfortable, inauthentic, but over time your mind starts to align. It wants harmony, so either your behavior must change or your self-image does. And if you keep repeating the behavior long enough, the dissonance pushes your identity upward. Carl Jung didn't use the term cognitive dissonance, but he described something similar. He saw people torn between the persona, the public face we show the world, and the true self, the authentic inner core. When these two are out of alignment, Jung said we feel anxiety, shame, or depression. But if we learn to hold the tension of opposites, to stay present with the discomfort rather than escape it, something new emerges. Transformation. So when your behavior doesn't match who you say you are, don't numb it. Use it. Sit in it. Let it motivate the realignment of your life. Machiavelli, on the other hand, would strip the whole thing of emotion. To him, appearances precede reality. It is not necessary to be good, but to appear good. That may sound cynical, but there's strategy here. If you appear to be something long enough, others start treating you that way. And once the environment reflects that identity back to you, you're more likely to grow into it. Fake it, yes, but with intention. Not to deceive, but to become. The healthy identity you begin identifying as someone who enjoys cooking healthy meals. At first it's a lie, but you buy groceries, you try one recipe. The dissonance begins to shift. 1 week in, you do feel healthier. The financial identity, you say, I'm someone who respects money. Then you open a spreadsheet. Even though you hate numbers, the act becomes the evidence your brain needs to rewrite the script. The confident identity. You tell yourself, I'm someone who speaks with clarity. You speak up once in a meeting, it feels awkward, but now you've cracked the first layer of the old identity. Behavior is not the reward of identity, it is the path to it. Not all dissonance is productive. If your new identity is built on shame or pressure, it can backfire, leading to self-hate or burnout. The key is gentle dissonance. Push just enough to challenge yourself, but not so much that your nervous system goes into defense. Grow through tension, not trauma. You don't need to wait until you feel ready to become the person you dream of being. Start with small actions. Let your behaviors contradict your old limitations. Let the tension do its work, because the discomfort you feel when who you are clashes with who you want to be. That's not failure. That's your future identity fighting to be born. Trick 9. Prime your brain with visual cues. Shape your environment. Shape your mind. You walk into your workspace. One wall is blank. Another holds a vision board with bold images. A passport. A healthy meal. A quote you love. And a photo of a confident version of you. You sit down, and somehow, without trying, you feel more focused. More like the person you want to become. That's not magic. That's priming. And it might be the most underestimated psychological trick in the world. Priming is a psychological phenomenon where exposure to a stimulus, like an image, word, or sound, influences your behavior or mindset later, often without your awareness. In other words, what you see changes what you do. Even small details, like a photo, a sticky note, or the background on your phone, can trigger mental scripts that alter how you think, act, or feel. In one study, participants were asked to complete a scrambled sentence task, but the words were subtly related to rudeness. Interrupt, bold, assertive. When they finished, they were more likely to interrupt the next conversation than those primed with words like patient or polite. Another group was primed with words related to old age, like Florida, wrinkle, and gray. When they left the room, they literally walked slower than the control group. What you feed your brain, visually, linguistically, symbolically, seeps into your behavior. So ask yourself, what's on your desk? What's the wallpaper on your phone or laptop? What's the first thing you see when you wake up? Because whether you realize it or not, those images are shaping your subconscious. A cluttered desk can prime your brain for distraction. A screenshot of your credit card debt can prime you for shame. But a powerful quote in your own handwriting, that can prime you for action. This is environmental programming, and you're either doing it by design or by default. In Atomic Habits, James Clear says, environment is the invisible hand that shapes human behavior. One of his core strategies is to make positive cues obvious and frequent. Want to drink more water? Keep a full bottle in plain sight. Want to eat healthy? Put fruit on the counter instead of chips. Want to read more? Place your book on your pillow. These are not just reminders, they are behavioral triggers, microprimers that nudge your brain toward the next right step. Carl Jung believed that symbols have power, not because they're magic, but because they connect the conscious mind to the unconscious archetypes within. He would say that when you place a powerful image in your environment, a lion, a cross, a rising sun, you're awakening latent aspects of your psyche. You're not just decorating a wall, you're inviting a part of yourself forward. So priming isn't just about productivity, it's about identity. You become what you consistently see, because what you see begins to speak. Machiavelli understood the psychological power of public image. He observed how princes and popes used flags, architecture, uniforms, colors, and rituals to prime the population for obedience or loyalty. Control the symbols. And you don't have to control the people, because they begin to self-regulate in response to what they've internalized. In modern terms, branding, corporate culture, social media, aesthetics, all of it is priming at scale. But you don't need a kingdom to use this tool. You just need a room, a phone, a few carefully chosen images, the fitness mirror, a photo of you at your healthiest taped to your mirror. You see it every morning. It primes your brain to make better physical choices throughout the day. The money cue, a sticky note on your credit card that says, is this a need or a habit? Before every swipe, your mind is primed to pause. The confidence wall, a digital vision board with phrases like, I speak clearly, I trust my instincts, or I build before I consume. These phrases shape who walks into your meetings. Even if no one else sees them, this isn't decoration, this is mental armor. In a world of ads, clickbait, and algorithmic manipulation, you are constantly being primed without your permission. The question is, are you designing your own environment, or letting someone else do it? If you're not careful, your phone becomes a portal of random influences. Fear, outrage, shame, urgency. So, take back control. Make your world a mirror of your intentions. What surrounds you shapes you. Every image, every word, every object is a vote toward the person you're becoming. So, design your space like it matters. Because it does, because your environment is not just where you live, it's where your future self is being programmed. Trick 10. Repetition plus identity statements. Rewire yourself. One phrase at a time you say, I'm bad with money. Or, I've always been anxious, or maybe I just can't focus. Now pause. That's not just a complaint, that's a command to your unconscious mind. Because the more you repeat a belief, the more your brain turns it into reality. But here's the trick. You can reverse this. You can use repetition. not to reinforce your limitations, but to recode your identity. The brain doesn't learn by inspiration, it learns by repetition. Every time you repeat a thought or behavior, you strengthen the neural pathway that supports it, like carving a groove deeper into the brain's architecture. Neuroscientists call this Hebbian learning, neurons that fire together, wire together. So the more often you tell yourself, I'm someone who follows through, the more likely your brain is to treat that statement as truth and behave accordingly. Repetition is how the mind forms habits, and habits are how the mind builds identity. There's a big difference between saying, I need to stop procrastinating, and I'm someone who finishes what I start. Because the second statement speaks from identity, and identity is what behavior wants to stay loyal to. James Clear emphasizes this in Atomic Habits. Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. Don't just set goals. Shape your identity, word by word. Say, I'm someone who protects their focus. I'm a calm communicator. I take care of my future self. I grow under pressure. These are not affirmations for the mere, they're instructions to your brain. Carl Jung believed that words have power, especially when they are aligned with symbolic archetypes inside the unconscious. He would say, when you declare something like, I am a builder, not a destroyer, you're not just playing with language, you're awakening a pattern that lives within you already. To Jung, these patterns, the wise self, the warrior, the healer, the creator, are latent possibilities inside all of us. And when we speak as if we are them, we begin to draw them to the surface. The voice leads, the psyche follows. Machiavelli would likely focus less on internal transformation and more on external perception. He would say it enough, and others will believe it. And once they do, you become it. In politics, in leadership, in negotiation, Machiavelli saw identity as performative. Reputation was reality. Repetition was the tool. Today, we see the same in branding, personal influence, and public speaking. If you repeatedly say, this is who I am, the world begins to mirror that back to you. And over time, that reflection becomes reinforcement. In habits, instead of saying, I need to work out, say, I'm someone who honors their body with movement. In productivity, swap I'm so behind with, I create progress daily, even in small ways. In anxiety, replace I can't handle this with, I breathe, then respond, I've handled worse. In money, rather than I'm terrible with finances, say I'm someone who gives every dollar a job. The shift feels subtle, but the psychological weight behind it is massive, because your identity is not built on what happens to you, but on what you repeat to yourself. This isn't about lying to yourself. Don't say I'm confident if you're shaking inside. Instead, speak to the direction you're growing in. Say, I'm becoming someone who trusts themselves more every day. I'm learning how to stand tall, especially when I feel small. This keeps your statements believable, emotionally honest, and internally sustainable. Try this. Choose one identity phrase. Write it down somewhere visible. Pair it with a habit, like brushing your teeth or drinking your morning coffee. Say it out loud every day for 30 days. Watch how your behavior starts to align with the words you've planted. Who you are is shaped not just by what you do, but by what you say to yourself when no one's listening. Words are mirrors. Say something long enough, and it becomes the lens through which you see the world, and the path you walk in it. So choose carefully, because the most powerful psychological trick of all might just be the story you keep telling yourself. Trick 11. Use the door interface technique. Start big, then scale down. You ask your friend for $100. They pause, frown, and say, no way. You nod, and then casually say, okay, no worries, could I borrow just $20 then? They pause again this time. They say, yes, congratulations, you just used the door interface technique, one of the most reliable persuasion tricks in psychology. It works not because your second request is small, but because the contrast makes it feel reasonable. This method was first studied by social psychologist Robert Cialdini, who tested how request size affects compliance. He found that people were far more likely to say yes to a small favor if it was preceded by a much larger rejected favor, because humans are wired for reciprocity. The unconscious need to give back when we feel someone has made a concession. When you reduce your request, it feels like you're compromising, and the other person, often unconsciously, feels the urge to compromise back. It becomes a social exchange, not just a decision. Machiavelli would love this trick. He knew that appearances of flexibility could be more powerful than brute force. If you asked directly for what you wanted, it might sound entitled. But if you ask for more than you need, and then scale back, you give the illusion of humility. In The Prince, he writes, men judge more by the eye than by the hand. For everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are. By starting big and stepping down, you appear cooperative. Even though the smaller request was your goal all along, that's persuasion by design, not deceit. Just strategic framing. Carl Jung might interpret this through the lens of internal negotiation. We don't just persuade others, we're constantly persuading ourselves. Imagine you're trying to commit to a new workout routine. Telling yourself, I'll do an hour a day feels overwhelming. You fail once, and your inner critic attacks. But what if you use the door-in-the-face trick on yourself? Start by setting a ridiculous standard. I'll run 5 miles every morning. You resist. You reject. Then you offer yourself a concession. Okay, just a 15-minute walk instead. It feels like a win. In truth, you're bypassing internal resistance by reframing the lower commitment as a compromise. Sometimes your shadow self, the lazy, the anxious, the avoidant part, won't respond a lot, but it will respond to contrast. In sales, a customer enters your store. You show them the premium package first. $299 a month. They flinch. You then show them the standard option. $99. Suddenly, that $99 feels fair. It hasn't changed, but the anchor has. In parenting, a teen asks to stay out until 2 a.m. The parent says no. Then the teen settles for midnight. The parent feels generous, but midnight was the target all along. In fundraising, a charity rep asks for a $500 donation. You decline, then they say, "Would $50 help today?" That smaller amount feels doable by comparison, even though it might have felt large on its own. It's all about manipulating the frame, not the content. This trick can be abused, especially in marketing and politics. When used manipulatively, it can pressure people into commitments they don't actually want, just because they feel cornered by courtesy. So here's the test. Are you using this to help the other person clarify their boundaries? Or are you using it to sneak under their defenses? The first is persuasion. The second is manipulation. Use with care. If someone hits you with a massive ask, pause before accepting the smaller one. Ask, is this reasonable? Or do I just feel relief after rejecting something worse? When you learn to see the setup, you reclaim your yes and your power. The door-in-the-face technique teaches us a critical truth. Humans rarely make decisions in isolation. We make them in comparison. So if you want someone to say yes, don't just offer them a good option. Offer them a bad one first. Let them reject it. Let them feel the relief. Then present what you really wanted. They'll walk away thinking they made the right choice. And in a way, they did. Trick 12. The foot-in-the-door technique. How small commitments lead to big wins. You're walking through your neighborhood. A volunteer stops you and asks, "Would you mind signing a petition to support safer school zones?" You agree. It's simple. No big deal. A week later, they return. "We're looking for volunteers to speak at the town meeting. Since you already signed the petition, would you be willing to come?" You hesitate, but you say yes. That's not random. That's the foot-in-the-door technique. A psychological strategy that turns tiny commitments into major buys. First tested in the 1960s by psychologists Friedman and Fraser. This technique works on a simple principle. If someone agrees to a small request, they are more likely to agree to a larger one later, especially if the two are logically connected. Why? Because we like to see ourselves as consistent, and once we take a public or internal stance, we feel pressure to stay aligned with that identity. Your first yes becomes a psychological seed. Saying no afterward feels like pulling up your own roots. In Atomic Habits, James Clear calls this the identity feedback loop. Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you want to become. So when you agree to a small favor, your brain whispers, "I guess I'm the kind of person who helps with this," because that internal statement grows stronger with each new yes. The trick isn't just persuasion, it's self-reinforcement. Carl Jung would interpret this as the expansion of the persona, the social mask we wear to navigate society. Once you perform a socially aligned act, say, supporting a cause, you begin to integrate that behavior into your identity. And the more you act in line with that persona, the more real it becomes, not just to others, but to yourself. Your conscious actions literally start to reorganize your unconscious self-image. So what starts as just a signature can evolve into a lifestyle shift. Machiavelli would see this not as a trick, but as a governing strategy. Give people small roles, let them believe they're choosing it, then gradually increase the ask, until they're loyal without realizing they've been led. Men willingly believe what they wish to be true. If the prince can make the people feel involved, he needn't control them through force. The first yes grants psychological access, and the rest is simply pacing. In sales, a company asks you to download their free guide. A week later, they ask you to sign up for a webinar. After that, they pitch the full $499 course. But by then, you feel like you're already in. You've voted with your attention. In relationships, your partner asks you to help with a small errand. Later, they ask for bigger commitments. You comply, not because of pressure, but because you've built the identity of being supportive. In business leadership, a manager asks their team to review a short proposal, then later asks for full implementation. Since the team already invested time, they're more likely to buy into the broader vision. This trick works best when each ask feels connected. Not random, but evolutionary. When used ethically, the foot-in-the-door technique helps people overcome fear or inertia. It eases them in, allowing for psychological pacing. But when misused, it can become a slippery slope, where someone is manipulated into saying yes to things they would have refused outright, if only they'd known where it was heading. So ask yourself, Is this progression logical and respectful? Am I revealing the bigger picture as we go? Would I feel comfortable if the roles were reversed? Because trust, once broken, is much harder to rebuild than a second yes. This trick isn't just for others. It's for you. Want to develop discipline? Start with 1 push-up a day, 1 line of journaling, 1 sentence of reading. The first yes to action becomes a doorway. You're more likely to do 5 push-ups once you've done 1. You're more likely to journal a paragraph once you start. Momentum is built from entry points, not pressure. The foot in the door technique reminds us that people and minds don't leap. So if you want someone to say yes to your big vision, don't demand it all at once. Offer the first step. Let them take it. And when they do, the path you've paved will begin to look like their own idea. And that's not just strategy. That's persuasion with patience. Trick 13: ask when they're exhausted. Influence through timing. You've had a long day, your body's heavy, your brain's foggy, you just want to collapse into your bed. And then someone asks, "Hey, can I crash here tonight?" You are going to say no, but you're too tired to argue, so you shrug, sigh, and say, "Fine." That wasn't generosity. That was decision fatigue. And whether they knew it or not, they just used one of the oldest tricks in the book. Ask when they're exhausted. Because tired people don't want to analyze. They want to be done. Psychologist Roy Baumeister coined the term decision fatigue to describe what happens when your willpower wears down after repeated choices. Throughout the day, your brain acts like a battery. Every decision, what to eat, how to reply, when to speak up, uses mental energy. By the end of the day, your decision-making ability is weaker. You're more likely to say yes just to end the conversation, avoid conflict. Even if it compromises your values, go with the default option. Even if it's not what you really want. That's why smart persuaders wait until the right moment. Not to argue louder, but to catch you softer. Carl Jung would interpret this as a collapse of the ego's control. The ego, our conscious mind, tries to make rational choices, but when tired, its defenses drop. That's when deeper drives, emotions, habits, and unconscious patterns take over. It's not that tired people lose their intelligence, they lose their resistance. So a decision made at 11 p.m. under pressure might not reflect your best self, but rather your most depleted one. Machiavelli would smile at this tactic. He believed power often lies not in what you ask for, but in when you ask for it. Men are driven more by necessity than by desire. He would say, don't confront them when they're strong. Wait until they're distracted, divided, or tired. Then offer them your terms as a form of relief. It's not forced. It's timed surrender. And most won't even realize they've given it. In relationships, your partner comes home exhausted. That's when you bring up your small request. They say yes, not from joy, but because they lack the energy to say no. In sales, a car dealer keeps you at the lot for hours. By the time you're signing papers, you've stopped thinking critically. You just want it to be over. In parenting, kids wait until their parents are tired or distracted to ask for sugar, screen time, or sleepovers. Why? Because tired parents say yes faster. These aren't coincidences. They're behavioral pressure points. And the best persuaders know where they are. This tactic can be used ethically, when timing helps someone overcome fear or doubt, but it often crosses the line into manipulation, especially when used to push decisions people would reject in full strength. Here's a gut check. Would this person say yes if they were fully alert, empowered, and am I helping them make a clear decision, or sliding past their defenses? Because ease is not the same as consent, and convenience is not the same as clarity. You can also turn this trick against manipulation. If you notice someone trying to get you to agree late at night, at the end of a long shift, or after emotional drain, pause. Say, let me sleep on it. Can we revisit this tomorrow? I want to give you a real answer, not a tired one. Don't mistake fatigue for agreement. You can even use this trick on your own habits. For example, want to build a journaling habit? Do it at night, when your resistance is low. Want to prep meals or plan budgets? Don't try after a 10-hour day. Set time when your mind is fresh. Good decisions require good timing, especially with yourself. Persuasion isn't always about strength. Sometimes, it's about timing your ask when resistance is weak, but power gained through exhaustion rarely lasts. It creates quiet resentment, not real loyalty. So use this trick only when the outcome serves both sides, not just your agenda, because just like sleep, real decisions need clarity. And the best yes is the one given with eyes wide open. Trick 14. Create mutual struggle. Bond through shared adversity. You meet someone new. There's polite conversation, small talk, smiles, but something's missing. Connection feels surface level. Then one day, you go through something together. A tough project, a long night, a moment of uncertainty. You both struggle, sweat, problem, solve, or vent. And afterward, you're closer, not because of comfort, but because of shared struggle. That's no accident. It's one of the most powerful psychological forces for building loyalty, trust, and persuasion. Psychologists call this co-experienced adversity, and it works by triggering ancient survival mechanisms. In evolutionary terms, humans were safest when they faced danger together. famine, flood, predators, war. Those who survived hardship side by side built deep emotional bonds because their nervous systems learned to associate safety with that person's presence. That instinct hasn't gone away. Today, the threat might be a failed pitch deck or a bad hotel during a business trip, but the psychology is the same. We got through that together. That memory becomes relational glue. Struggle raises cortisol, your stress hormone, but shared stress, when resolved together, also boosts oxytocin, the hormone tied to trust and bonding. This is why teams that go through conflict and emerge on the other side often outperform teams that never had to face difficulty. The scar becomes the seal. Carl Jung believes that the deepest connections are formed not through perfection, but through vulnerabilities shared in chaos. He wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." To Jung, facing hardship together is what breaks down the persona, the polished social mask, and brings forth the real self. And when two people see each other without the mask, they don't just connect, they heal. Machiavelli would take a more strategic view. He would say, if you want loyalty, don't give people comfort, give them adversity with you. In The Prince, he describes how rulers maintain power by testing the loyalty of those around them, and by putting others through shared hardship to build allegiance, because those who suffer beside you begin to believe you're one of them. And when they associate their survival with you, they're less likely to betray you. Shared struggle becomes strategic cement. Military and boot camps, soldiers go through physically and emotionally brutal training together. The bond is often lifelong, not because of shared belief, but because of shared pain. Startups and founding teams, founders and early hires working 18-hour days, eating cheap food, and risking everything. Years later, they still feel like family, even when the stakes are no longer like friendships formed in crisis. People who meet during times of illness, grief, activism, or shared burnout often form stronger, faster friendships than those who meet in comfort. Why? Because authenticity thrives in discomfort. Masks fall off when survival kicks in. You can't manufacture suffering, but you can create opportunities for good. Invite someone into a difficult project where you both must grow. Tackle a problem neither of you fully understand. Share an honest struggle, then ask for help solving it together. This is not about trauma bonding. It's about growth bonding. Let's figure this out together. The goal isn't to break people. It's to invite them into meaningful effort with you. Some leaders and narcissists create fake emergencies to keep people dependent. They invent fires just so they can solve them, or engineer chaos to bind people emotionally. That's not leadership. That's emotional hostility. So ask yourself, are we growing together or just surviving together? Is the adversity real or manufactured for control? Use shared struggle to build trust, not to manipulate loyalty. The deepest connections are not built in ease. They're built in effort, in sweat, in stuck moments, in shared tension. So if you want to lead, don't just offer comfort, offer a challenge. Invite someone to struggle well beside you, because the bonds that survive hardship don't just last, they transform both people. Trick 15. Control the frame. Don't argue inside theirs. Imagine someone tells you, you're just being selfish. If you defend yourself, you've already lost, because you've accepted the frame. That selfishness is the issue, and now you're on trial. But what if you paused and replied, actually, I'm setting boundaries. Now you've changed the frame, and in doing so, you've shifted the entire conversation. That's the essence of one of the most powerful persuasion tools, frame control. A frame is the mental structure someone uses to define a situation. It shapes what the conflict is about, what questions are allowed, who is seen as right or wrong, what the expected outcome should be. Frames are like invisible containers for reality. And most arguments are lost not because of poor reasoning, but because the wrong frame was accepted at the start. Whoever controls the frame controls the flow. Machiavelli understood this well. He knew that perception is more powerful than truth, because people act on what they believe, not what is. In The Prince, he emphasizes appearance over reality. It is sufficient to appear, but if you control how others perceive the situation, you don't need to force them. They'll comply naturally, because their frame already favors you. Carl Jung offers another angle. People don't just frame reality intellectually. They project internal patterns onto the world. So when someone frames you as aggressive, they might actually be projecting their own repressed anger onto you. Jung believed that reclaiming power requires seeing through the projection and refusing to accept frames that don't align with your inner truth. That's not arrogance. It's psychological sovereignty. In negotiation, a buyer says, your rates are really high. If you respond by defending your price, you've accepted the frame. A better response. It sounds like quality matters a lot to you. You've reframed the conversation around value, not cost. In arguments, someone says, why are you always so negative? Instead of denying it, try, I care enough to tell the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Now the frame is about honesty, not negativity. In leadership, a team resists a change and says, This will be hard. You reframe, that means it's meaningful. Difficulty becomes significance, not obstruction. Frame control doesn't mean dominating people, it means guiding the meaning of a conversation. Think of it like chess. If they define the board, the pieces, and the goal, you're already boxed in. So when someone frames you as the villain, the fool, or the weak link, you don't win by defending yourself within that label. You win by questioning the premise, or better yet, replacing it entirely. Want to flip the frame fast? Ask questions that redirect focus. Example, why didn't you meet the deadline? What resources do you need to hit deadlines consistently going forward? The second question shifts the frame from blame to problem solving. Now you're not defending yourself, you're leading the conversation. Used wisely, frame control clarifies truth. Used manipulatively, it distorts it. Here's the ethical check. Is this frame helping both people see the situation more clearly? Or is it just making you look better? Because a healthy frame elevates the conversation. A toxic one just hides the real issue. Powerful people don't always have the best arguments. They simply refuse to argue on terms that don't serve them. They set the stage, they write the script, they control the frame. So next time you feel cornered by someone else's words, stop and ask, who decided what this conversation is about? And what happens if I redefine it? Because the first frame that gets accepted usually decides who wins. You've just explored 15 psychological tricks, tools for persuasion, behavior change, and internal mastery. Some were subtle, some were bold, some worked on others, others worked on you. But all of them reveal the deeper truth. We are not purely rational beings. We are influenceable, habit-driven, emotionally reactive, but we are also, and that's where the power lies. Let's be clear. Just because something influences doesn't mean it manipulates. The best psychologists, teachers, and leaders use these tools not to deceive, but to help people overcome fear, inertia, and self-sabotage. Sometimes a well-timed question, a visual cue, or a repeated phrase is exactly what someone needs to believe they can change. Used with intention and clarity, these psychological principles become tools of transformation, not control. Machiavelli taught us the mechanics of strategy. Jung taught us the importance of soul. Together, they offer a complete map. The shadow and the persona, the visible action and the hidden intention, the tools of influence. And the truths of the self, you now hold the keys to persuasion. But the question is, how will you use them? Before you influence others, you must recognize how you influence yourself. Because let's be honest, how many times have you talked yourself out of your potential? How often have you framed your own life in limiting language? How many moments of growth have you missed because your identity said, "That's not who I am"? Now you have tools to flip that script. Repetition plus identity statements to rewire belief. Cognitive dissonance to spark internal change. Priming plus environment control to shape daily. Momentum microhabits to turn later into now. You are no longer at the mercy of moods and old narratives. You are training your mind to listen to your intention, not your fear. These techniques are already in your life. In ads, politics, social media, peer pressure, relationships. They don't wait for your consent. They work whether you understand them or not. But now, you do understand them. So when someone asks for something big, then shrinks the ask, frames a conversation to make you defensive, uses your fatigue against you, mirrors you to build fake rapport, triggers urgency to bypass reflection, you'll recognize it. And in that recognition, you reclaim your freedom to respond instead of react. The most powerful people in any room aren't the ones who speak the loudest. They shape meaning. They steer emotion. They define the context before the content even arrives. From now on, that can be you. Not to control others, but to lead conversations with clarity, to anchor your relationships in intent, to live your life from a place of agency, not autopilot. Here's a quick reminder of the 15 psychological techniques you now have in your toolkit. Section 1. Attention and influence. Use their names strategically. Anchor with touch or gesture. The nudge and the nod mirror others' scarcity and urgency cues. Section 2. Cognition and conditioning. Chew gum while you study. And again during recall. Use music as a memory trigger. Use cognitive dissonance to shift identity. Prime your environment with visual cues. Use repetition plus identity statements. Section 3. Strategy and persuasion. Door in the face technique. Foot in the door technique. Ask when they're exhausted. Create mutual struggle to build connection. Control the frame. Never argue inside theirs. Each one of these tools can be used to heal, inspire, build trust, or unlock potential. They can also be twisted to deceive, exploit, or dominate. So remember, intent makes the difference. Not the online kind, the real kind. The kind that influences a child to believe in themselves, a friend to take action, a team to unite yourself, to stop waiting for permission. That's real power. It doesn't need a title, it doesn't need a script. It just needs someone who knows how the mind works, and chooses to use that knowledge with wisdom. Carl Jung wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." You now have the tools to choose with precision, to shape not only your actions, but your identity, not just your words, but your impact, not just others, but yourself. So go influence, but start within. Use these principles not to become a manipulator, but to become a master of intention, because that's what true persuasion is. Not getting what you want, but creating a world where everyone rises together.